nothing to stop it. And even yesterday, the New York Times has a report that the federal government knows about the child labor abuses because of the open border and the fact that the Biden administration is not protecting those kids, which can be done so easily if we would just secure the border. Schools are indoctrinating our children, teens, and young adults and college students with extreme, radical, divisive, woke ideology based on critical race and critical social justice theory. We have a military seemingly more focused on pronouns than on supporting and defending the Constitution. Lawlessness reigns, which we just heard about from Derek, so this very, very painful reminder. Those who are friends of the Biden administration or are useful pawns to the administration face a different set of consequences when they break the law than those who they deem as useless to their agenda. And if you are political opposition, then, like, say, President Trump, you face indictments and arrests with the law twisted against you unjustly. Things are so bad. Sometimes it seems hopeless. You may even wonder if you can really make a difference. Thanks to the wisdom of our founding fathers, we have the opportunity to change course, but it's not going to be easy. Because our founding documents say that our government derives its just powers from the consent of the governed. Americans will have a chance to show that when it comes to the radical leftist agenda, we do not consent. Americans can choose to make a change and get us back on the right track. And in the United States of America, elected officials get their authority from the consent of the governed. And if there is no election integrity, there is no consent. We all know elections have consequences, and we've all learned that election integrity has consequences too. Our liberties are only as secure as our elections. Let me repeat that. Our liberties are only as secure as our elections. You remember when Benjamin Franklin left the Constitutional Convention, he was asked by a woman what kind of government the delegates were leaving or creating, and he famously replied, "A republic, if you can keep it." An answer and a challenge. Ever since our founding, and especially in the last 3 years, Tea Party Patriots Action has taken on that challenge. We've been working on election integrity in concert with coalition partners like the Conservative Partnership Institute and the newly formed Election Integrity Network. We've traveled the country working at the grassroots level to build permanent election integrity infrastructure through local election integrity task forces, to train poll watchers and poll workers, to teach our fellow citizens how they can get involved to make a difference and to ensure that our elections are honest, transparent, and secure. Because our liberties are only as secure as our elections. Does this make a difference? Absolutely, it does. Let me give you an example. In the Georgia primaries at the end of last May, the statewide Election Integrity Coalition helped place 1,500 poll watchers and 300 poll workers. Members of Georgia's DeKalb County Election Integrity Task Force made a huge difference. They built relationships across the political aisle, befriended election workers, recruited poll workers and poll watchers, and prepared in case any issues arose. And when there was a problem, the election tallies for one Democratic primary race, there was a problem with one Democratic primary race, they were ready to act. It was actually the candidate who caught the problem. She saw the initial results and the machine count showed that she had received no votes in her own precinct. And she knew that had to be wrong because she voted for herself. And her husband said he voted for her too. So she knew she should have 1 vote from herself, and she thought she should have 2 votes because her husband was supposed to vote for her. Now, it's possible he thought he could get away with not voting for her and other people would cover it up, but that's unlikely. So she knew there was a problem and that the machine count had to be wrong, and she started asking questions. The Election Integrity Task Force was in place, observing and volunteering to help if needed. Leadership in both political parties in the county set aside their differences to help resolve the problem. And in the end, the local election board decided to do a hand count. And the hand count revealed that this candidate who saw the problem, who was originally in 3rd place with the machine count, was actually the 1st place finisher and entitled to go to the primary runoff. She went on to the runoff, she won. She went on to the general election, and DeKalb County, Georgia is a very Democrat county. And so now she is today the Democratic county commissioner for that particular race, for that seat. Now there was an anomaly in this particular race because a candidate withdrew from the election in the legally allotted time, but it's suspected there was an error in removing that person from the ballot, a clerical error, and that caused a problem. The point here is this: in the end, the hand count results became the certified results before certification, not the original inaccurate machine count. And since the certified results were correct, there was no need for a lawsuit or a court case to challenge the election. Those activists made a difference. The certified results in that one race were correct, and the community could trust that race's results. Those activists are ordinary Americans just like you, who got involved and decided to make a difference. You can make a difference too. The goals for helping turn the tide in 2024 are to secure and win elections and then win legislatively in 2025. To do that, we all have to get involved, and we have to set our sights on the fall of 2024 with laser-like focus. But there's a lot of work to do between now and next fall, and 2 falls from now, I guess. So how can we do that? I'm going to go through and show you how you can make a difference to secure elections. Then next year, after we do some other things that we're working on internally, Gregory and perhaps some other people from your executive committee will learn how Tea Party Patriots Action has modernized getting out the vote, and they'll be able to teach you those techniques which will help you with winning in 2024. So let's dig in right now to find out what more you can do for election integrity and what we at Tea Party Patriots Action have been teaching people to do since 2021. What I'll present is the same program that DeKalb County, Georgia used to correct the issues in the primary that I just mentioned. It's based on the work of a task force model that Cleta Mitchell with the Election Integrity Network created. So we are working on building permanent election integrity infrastructure. And that means it needs to be able to stay not just for this coming election in 2024, but it's got to exist in 2024, in 2026, in 2028, and in the off-year elections in between, and to continue on. So as I talk about this, I want you to keep that in mind. The other thing that I want you to keep in mind is there are going to be some things that I mentioned tonight that there are people here in this area in California who are already working on some of the components. I am not suggesting in any way that you should usurp them or discount the work that they are doing. It is very important work. But I'm going to go through 8 different areas that a task force can be involved in. And if you're not engaged in those areas, then think about how what you already have in your area here in your counties, in this area in Redlands, and then what else you can add to it to grow it. So the task force basics, these are very similar to just having a group basics in some ways. The task force is continually working to ensure transparent, fair, and honest elections in the county and to restore and maintain faith in the outcome of the elections. The task force needs to be recruiting volunteers. It needs to build working groups, and I'm going to go through those in a few minutes. Delegate assignments, and it's a team, and you have to think of each other as a team and teammates. Now, when you hear me talking about county, you have counties here in California, so that applies. I have these other unit and parish because in Wisconsin they do it by municipality, and in Louisiana they have parishes. Task force members regularly attend the meetings. They review the task force communications to stay up to date. They make a commitment to attend at least one election board meeting per quarter. They make commitments to work on election day as a poll worker or a poll watcher, or to do absentee ballot chasing and curing. And since we're in California, I can confidently say you should also be doing harvesting. And then, if possible, work for early voting and during the tabulation, adjudication, and certification phases of the election process. And then volunteer for different working groups. The county task force working groups, each working group will correlate with the steps that I'm going to go over, and these steps are in the guide, which you'll be able to take with you at the end tonight. They're on the table right down here. You'll volunteer for working groups according to your skills and interests. So, you've got to make sure you're doing things that meet your skills. To be a poll watcher in most places around the country, you can't talk at all. You go in and you sit quiet and you're not allowed to talk. Most places won't even allow you to bring a phone out, so you can't even bring a phone out. So you're just standing, not talking, and you're observing all day long. And if you are somebody who cannot keep your mouth shut because you're such an extrovert that you like to be talking to people constantly and greeting and saying hello, you are probably better served harvesting ballots or chasing ballots during the daytime rather than doing poll watching. So even though there are a lot of different opportunities, make sure you're picking the things that match your skill set. And we've got so many, we have enough opportunities to match every skill set, I think. The working group members would sign up for steps that we list in the user guide, and they may need to communicate across the state to compare information, ask questions, mentor, train new volunteers, etc. So that's kind of just a basics for a task force and what I mean when I'm talking about a task force and how it works together. And then there would be a steering committee or a core committee of the task force and a local leader as well. So what are the steps? Now, up until today, I've been calling them the 8 steps for election integrity task forces, but I kind of think of it more as 8 lanes, 8 different areas for a task force to be involved in, because they're not necessarily do 1 and then go to 2 and then do 3, but it's different things that need to be happening to secure elections. If you've got a phone and you want to pull your phone out while I'm talking, you can do this if you'd like. You type in the URL, tinyurl.com/2022 work groups. tinyurl.com/2022 work groups. And it'll take you to this form that you can volunteer with, and if you fill that out, we'll be able to follow up and help connect you with other people who are in the areas you're interested in. Okay, so step 1 is to build a presence in the local election office. And I think of, if I were doing this and creating this kind of a task force in my county, I would have a working group that I would call the Electoral Board and Relations Working Group. That's what I would call it. The goal of the task force members is to be ever present at the election office and board meetings to hear and see and learn things that are only learned by being there. So this is a step that really hones in on presence, people, and personal relationships. Now I need just a little bit of help from you here in the audience. In California, is it an election board or is it a county commission? Who oversees your elections?
The county registrar of voters, which is usually an appointed official by the county board of supervisors.
Okay, all right, and then the county board registrar, do they have a board or is it just one single?
One person, one heads up that department.
Okay, so you would want to be involved probably in meetings with your board of supervisors when that registrar is reporting to the supervisor, and make sure you're paying attention to the kind of communications that are going on. And if your supervisors, your board of supervisors, are making funding decisions or approving any contracts or have decisions on contracts, you'd want to show up and pay attention to what's happening in those kind of meetings. And you also want to befriend your election registrar, Now, in DeKalb County, Georgia, because they befriended the registrar, it was much easier for them to step in and help volunteer to do the hand count. If they had not done that, a hand count would have proceeded probably, but it might have been a little bit more difficult. But because they did that in a very Democratic county, the Republican Party chairman in DeKalb County, Georgia, serves as the election integrity leader in that particular county. And she really made an effort to befriend that person who is the equivalent of your registrar, and that helped going into the election. So she had that pre-existing relationship, and it was not antagonistic, it was a fairly neutral relationship, and that made it possible for them to be able to help when the problem arose. So what I urge people to do when it comes to this step is to make a commitment that every decision made by the election office will be made in the presence of one or more representatives for the Election Integrity Task Force. And I just remembered, I don't have a slide that I do need to cover when I talk about one or more. There are 4 rules that Cleta Mitchell has for everyone who is engaging in election integrity. And Cleta is an attorney. She was our attorney. She was President Trump's attorney in Georgia. And the indictment of President Trump in New York is probably not going to be the only indictment that he faces. And I think we need to be prepared for that and realize that that is a very real possibility, that he's going to be indicted out of Fulton County, Georgia, and also due to the classified documents that he single-handedly by word, spoken word, could declassify as president, unlike a vice president or former Secretary of State. So we just need to be prepared for that. But Cleta was one of the attorneys on the phone call with President Trump in December or January of 2020, 2021, that is now under investigation in Fulton County, Georgia. And she started the Election Integrity Network, and she came up with all these different ways to make a difference. So she's an attorney. And when she tells me there are rules we need to follow, I pay attention, because she's trying to make sure that we stay on the right side of the law. And in this case right now, with what we have going on in our country, sometimes it's hard to do even when you're doing what you're supposed to. But she says it's always important to go in pairs. So you always want to have a witness with you. You have to stay calm. Keep calm. Just don't raise your voice. Don't get angry. Now here's how I think of that. It's really important that you're calm. Because if you are not, you're going to be sitting there. I'm trying to look for my phone, but I don't have it. So if you get angry, like let's say the registrar just ticks you off because they're making a bad decision about how they're going to handle the ballots and early voting or something, and you are so frustrated with it. Well, if you start screaming and yelling at that person, the first thing that's going to happen is someone else is going to whip out their phone and they're going to take a video of you, and it will go viral because we are weird in this country. We love watching people humiliate themselves. So it will be a terrible thing because you will go viral, but also that winds up harming the reputation of everyone in your own local group and across the country working on election integrity. So you have to remain calm, even when you're frustrated. So what I suggest to people to do, if you get really mad, now see, I'm from Georgia originally. I moved to Florida last year, but I lived in Georgia my whole entire life. I have some Southern mannerisms. One of the things that we do when people make us really mad, we just say, bless your heart. So if they're making you really mad, I want you to remember that and just go, bless your heart. And put a smile on and walk out the door. And if you don't know, bless your heart doesn't always mean something good. When we want it to mean something good, we say, bless your heart. I mean that the kind way. I'm praying for you. So then go out to your car, and you can get as angry as you want in your car, but keep your calm. And that's also why it's important to have someone with you, because that person can nudge you and help you stay calm, and also they can be a witness, and it's good to have two people. And then she says to keep on smiling. Oh, wait, before I go to smiling, she says to document everything. So once you get in your car, whip out some paper and write down every single thing that happened and whatever the decision was or the words were that upset you, so that you and your task force can figure out if there is a constructive way to solve the problem. And then always keep on smiling. So I tell these rules and try to be funny about it to help you smile. So when it says go with, in the last slide, with a witness, it's important that you have two people when you're going to do those kind of meetings. The second step, or area, if you will, is to research the local election office. Now this means researching the contracts, figuring out if there are any backroom deals going on, figuring out, so in Georgia, in DeKalb County's done fabulous work, and they have an election board, even though it's a totally Democratic county, who has been willing to listen in some cases. They figured out that they just realized that that county had used a loophole in our bill that was passed back in 2021 to stop Zuckerbugs from happening. There was a huge loophole in it, and the county was working around that loophole to take more money from one of the Zuckerberg foundations to help with the elections. Like $2 million, I think, is what they were looking at. Maybe wrong on that amount. So they were researching it on top of it and realized this was going on and wound up being able to act legislatively, and we've just had a law passed to tighten that loophole. At least a bill was passed, and the governor should be signing that. So you want to be paying attention so when problems arise, you can try to take action on it. So the first one was about building a presence and personal relationships. This step is about understanding the processes, the contracts, the procedures that are happening with your local elections in your county here. And so I urge you to make a commitment to use your state's Freedom of Information Act laws, or they're called FOIA federally, to research and understand and convey to other task force members what you learned from your research. The next step is to understand the local mail and the absentee ballot systems. So I would call it the absentee ballot working group, but I would like to note that the Election Integrity Network also has a working group on the mail system. I forgot the name of it, but they have one that is dedicated to understanding how your United States Postal Office locally processes ballots, and when they're returned, what do they do? If it's undeliverable, how do they handle it? And so they really encourage understanding that entire process. So that's what it means when we're talking about local mail, and also the absentee ballot process. You want to know the procedures and identify potential problems or issues with the mail and absentee vote system. And then when you identify those procedures, because you have been, or at least you have some people who are dedicated to building those personal relationships, you may be able to say, hey, have you thought about, could we tighten this up and make it work a little bit better, because you have built those relationships. So make a commitment to develop a team to follow the absentee ballots in the mail and the vote system and to understand that. And let me make sure I'm not forgetting one thing in that system. I don't think I am. Yeah, I am. Also in that particular area, when you get your guidebook, all of this will be, everything that I'm going over and more is in this guidebook. You want to, as you're understanding the absentee ballot systems, you want to understand how ballots are cured. So you've got three different things that can happen with absentee ballots. You've got, or mail ballots. Harvesting, which is where you go to a voter's house and they filled out the ballot and you take that ballot with you and you put it in the mail. That's harvesting. And you're allowed to do that in California. Then you've got chasing ballots, which is what you would really do if they don't want to let go of their ballot. You know they filled it out and they're going to put it in the mail. So you're just kind of saying, make sure you get it in the mail. Did you get it in the mail? Is it in the mail? You may not be taking it, but you're chasing it and making sure it gets all the way mailed. Then the other thing is curing ballots. And what happens when you cure a ballot, that is when the ballot comes back into the election office and something was wrong on the outside of the envelope. Maybe they didn't sign, maybe something didn't match up. There was some sort of problem, and that ballot, maybe not the ballot, but whatever that problem is, usually what happens is that you've got to go talk to the voter, and the voter either has to go into the office or sign some sort of affidavit or provide some other kind of documentation to finish it out and to cure it so it can then be counted. So those are three different processes, and you want to understand those very well. And then as the election draws near, have volunteers who are willing to do each of those kind of tasks. And hopefully by 2024, we'll have some software that'll make it a little bit easier to do some of that for you. In step 4, you want to become part of the election apparatus. So that means being poll watchers or being a poll worker. A poll work in California, what is a poll worker called? Is it a worker or is it a judge of elections or?
Poll worker.
Poll worker. Okay, that's easy. That's what it is in Georgia as well. Some places call it election officials, some people call it managers, some people call it judges, so it's a different word, but it's the people who work in the precinct and they will take your voter ID if you're a state which requires voter ID. I would imagine you're not because it's California. And then they check you in, they check you off the list, they give you the ballot, you go fill out the ballot or use the system to vote, and then they make sure that the ballot is put where it's supposed to be cast. So those are the workers, and normally they're paid. So you need people who are doing that. And the fact is that position is more important than the poll watcher. The poll watcher watches the entire process and makes sure that it is the rules and laws are being followed and that nobody's adding ballots where they shouldn't be, or that a voter isn't denied the ability to vote, or whatever it might be, and they're watching. But if they see a problem, they've got to leave, go outside the facility, because normally you're not allowed to make a phone call inside, and call a hotline, hoping you actually speak to a human in the middle of the election day or early voting period, and then you work with them to get it resolved from somewhere else before the voter leaves the facility. It's important, but it's not as important as a worker, because a worker can say, oh, that isn't where it's supposed to be. We're supposed to have the ballot box secured and tied up. Let's make sure we secure it. And they can just take action and take care of whatever the problem is, or the issue is, before it becomes a problem. So if you can work the polls rather than watching, that's more important. But if you can only do it for part of the time, then watching is also important. The next step is cleaning the voter rolls and list maintenance. So that's making sure that the people who are ineligible to vote on your voter rolls are challenged in the legal manner that is available to you. It's very important in this step This is the one step that I worry the most about with volunteers because of the Department of Justice that we have right now. Justice. And that is, you have to, when you're doing this step, when you're doing everything, you've got to follow all local, state, and federal laws. The Department of Justice has an entire division called the Civil Rights Division of the voting, like of the election law area. So the people who oversee elections have an entire area for civil right, the civil right to vote. And if they think you have violated someone's civil right to vote, the Department of Justice can come after you, not just your local or state authorities. So it's very important that if you're doing anything that is going to talk to voters, to ask them to verify they really are legitimately registered where they claim to be registered or whatever it might be, make sure that when you're doing that the script that you're using has been run by an attorney, and then you stick to that script. This is different than going door to door to get out the vote. When you go door to door to get out the vote, you know how sometimes they'll give you that script and it's loaded into the system and you read it and you get to the door and you say it one or two times and you're like, yeah, this is way too clumsy to say. I'm going to say it how I talk, but I'm still going to ask the right questions, and you just sort of get to the point, right? Anyone who's gone door to door, you probably all have done that. This is different though. And the reason that it's different is that because you could be accused of violating someone's civil right to vote just by asking them questions, you need to make sure that you have the script approved and then you stick to it. So just please heed that word, those words of caution for your sake and for all of our sakes. And then make a commitment to develop a list maintenance protocol, have the protocol approved by legal counsel, and begin to implement it for your county. And the thing about list maintenance is it is constant. It should be done constantly by your registrar, so you're constantly having to go back in and verify that it's up to date and accurate. There's a great organization, I don't have the in this slide deck their URL, but it's called Voter Reference Foundation. Voter Reference Foundation. And I believe the website for it is it's vote, VOTEREF, like voteref.org. I think that is their URL. They have the voter files that the registrars or the Secretary of State have on file on their website for a bunch of states in the country. I think at this point there are over 30 states. And that is a way for you to look at the voter file and you can start doing some research by looking at that. And it is not cleaned up. It is what is on file with your local government. So take a look at that. I don't remember if California is in there or not, but take a look. And their goal is to have it available for every single state in the country for anyone to see for free. So that's their goal. Okay. Now, protecting vulnerable voters. In Wisconsin, we found out what a huge problem this was in 2020. And it happened in other places as well, but Wisconsin did a very good job of highlighting the problem. And that is, there are places where people are in assisted living facilities or nursing homes, or they just simply need help filling out their ballot. Perhaps they can't see, perhaps they're housebound, whatever it may be, they may have someone helping them fill out the ballot. Well, when that happens, the voter's will should be on the ballot. However, the voter wanted the ballot to be marked, not the will of the helper. So it was not happening that way in Wisconsin, and people who were older people who had mental problems due to aging. Some of them even had their right to vote removed for their protection and for the sake of elections, and they still wound up casting ballots because the people in these nursing homes in 2020 somehow got every single person in every nursing home or all these nursing homes to vote 100%. So it's important that we're protecting those vulnerable voters. And Lori Roman in the ACRU, the American Constitutional Rights Union, not to be confused with the ACLU, but the ACRU, has this great program and training and a webinar, and Colonel Alan West works with them, and they have a whole system set up to protect vulnerable voters, protectvulnerablevoters.org. So I encourage you to have people who are willing to help to figure out what are the nursing homes and the assisted living facilities in your counties, and make sure that you've got people who can use their training to go in and make sure that you are protecting those vulnerable voters. And that is basically what I just said. So you want to have a working group, you want to make a list of all of those facilities, and then make sure that you've got those facilities assigned to a volunteer who will help protect them. Step 7 is to learn and observe the voting systems and the technology. You've already had Dr. Frank here, so you've already had a lot more information about the voting systems than I'm going to give you or that is in this documentation. I used to program computers. I worked for Fortune 500 companies, and I've seen the election voting software that we have, and I can just tell you that in Fortune 500 companies, we would not have been allowed to do the kind of updates that I've seen happen with the election systems, just on the fly in the middle of voting, the server with all of the whole voter rolls, the whole voter roll, poll books for Georgia. That server just got updated several different times during early voting. And I kept pushing and pushing and pushing, trying to figure out why is this happening, and never could get a very good answer. I said, well, it was standard updates. It happened to break things, and the poll pads weren't working, but it was a standard update. That kind of update, can you imagine running a retail store, like say the Home Depot where I used to work, and they just are like updating the systems on the fly, and the stores all of a sudden can't check people out and can't cash them out as they're leaving the store? You better believe that if that happened, the people up top would be down your throat all over you because they're losing money, and it has to be tight and secure and a very tight process. I don't think we have that process with our voting systems. And I think that we need to be striving to get our local registrar and the people who are overseeing the elections as a part of their employment to think more about the auditing and the processes and how updates are applied going forward with these systems, certainly until we can change the systems away from that. But if they haven't changed, and they are what they are by the time that elections roll around in 2024, we have to use what is in place. So let's try to figure out ways as individual citizens, not as computer programmers, not as sheriffs, not as elected officials. Those have different roles and opportunities to help affect change with the voting systems. But as individual citizens, what can we do? And so the task force will have a working group that understands the voting systems from the beginning all the way to the end in your county. And when I say beginning, I mean from the time somebody registers to vote, how they are registered to vote, to when the ballots are sent out for mail voting and early voting begins, to a person who requests their ballot and gets their ballot and casts their ballot, and then the system is certified. So all the way, or the elections are certified from the very beginning to the very end. You need to understand the processes, the computer and the paper processes. And then you need to make a commitment that the voting systems working group will brief the entire task force on how the voting systems work prior to early voting, and alert the task force of areas that you think might be a concern so that poll workers and poll watchers can be on alert and on guard for them. In Georgia in 2020, there is a case going on right now. It's still a valid, real case that is moving through the court systems in Georgia about ballots that appear to have been counted more than one time in Georgia. And it seems that the ballots were scanned more than one time. I don't know if they were scanned more than one time because there was an error and they were supposed to clean out the error, or it was late at night, or what the problem was. But there are ballots that seem to have been scanned more than one time. And this case does a very good job, and Voter GA's website puts the information out there to explain why, as they've looked at the scanned files, they think that batches of 100 were repeated and counted more than one time. And a very brief explanation for this would be that there's a batch of 100 ballots, because that's how they process mailed in ballots in Georgia, and they run it through batches of 100. There would be a batch of 100, and in that batch, everyone voted for Biden except for one person. This is hypothetical, and I'm simplifying it just for the sake of making it easy to understand. Everyone voted for Biden all the way to ballot 97. When they got to ballot 98, it was a Trump vote. And then 99 and 100 were for Biden again. So one vote at number 98 was for Trump. And on the fourth ballot down, the person who filled in the oval kind of filled it in and scribbled outside the line, and there was a little hook on the top, kind of like an A, or maybe a backwards A to U. So there was a hook on the top. Now, the chances of that exact same sequence being in another batch of 100 in the exact same order, statistically speaking, is pretty low. Because somewhere, even if it's still 99 to 1, that one ballot for Trump should have been somewhere else in the stack. But instead, you've got another batch where it's 1 to 97 for Biden, 99 is for Trump, 98 and 99 are for Biden, and the fourth ballot down has a hook scribbled out outside of outside of the lines, and if you copy and paste it and overlay it to the first one, it matches perfectly. And there were more than one batch of 100 that were identical in the scanned images that were counted. So something weird went on with that. I think that is why there was a spike in Georgia in the vote count. Because we see from the video where they kicked everyone out, contrary to the law in Georgia, and kicked out the poll watchers, and kicked out the media, and kicked out the public, and then they continued to count. So they should not have continued to count without giving public notice and making sure the public was back in the room. That's against the law in Georgia. Anyway, they were counting, and we didn't expect any more ballots to come in because they said they were done, and then they did come in because they were counting, and then they were counting some ballots for whatever reason more than one time. And it is very possible that the people who are doing that, as you're going through and you're doing routine, monotonous, repetitive steps, sometimes you just make mistakes. You think you counted something and you didn't, and that's why you want checks and balances and eyes in there and other people watching, so if you make a mistake, someone can make sure it gets corrected. But no one was there to catch it, so it's possible it was completely a mistake. But that happened. It's still moving through Georgia right now. What does that have to do with voting systems? I think that one of the big things about it that it has to do with is understanding that, say, okay, here's a problem that could happen, so be on the lookout for this. The ballots are going to be scanned manually, and we need to make sure that as they're being scanned manually in the tabulation center, we always have eyes in there the whole entire time they're scanning. And if they say they're leaving, or they're not, or they're done, or whatever for the day, you don't take their word for it. You wait until they actually lock and close and leave. And so you just are there the whole time. So it's a little bit of the poll watching, and it's also saying, okay, this is an area where we're concerned. Or you're making sure that, like, now that we watched what happened in Arizona a few months ago, making sure that when the computer systems are being tested, it's called logic and accuracy testing, or L&A testing, that people are in there watching that testing, and that they are making sure that every single printer prints, and that a ballot off of every printer can actually be read by the scanner, and that the settings are proper on the printers. So it seems like that as individual citizens, we can keep an eye out for, even if we can't go in and audit the code the computer system code or change the computer systems because we have elected officials who seemingly are hell-bent on keeping these systems. So I'm trying to tell you things we can do given the situation and the rules that we're in right now. Okay. The last thing is legislative and grassroots lobbying. Cleta's book originally had 7 steps. I added this one as the 8th step because it's what we do so much of at Tea Party Patriots action. So it's making sure that you're following the legislation, whether it's in Washington, D.C. or in your state assembly or locally. And when you want legislation to pass one way or the other, you want to block it, that you are making phone calls, writing letters to the editor, and getting engaged in the advocacy type work that legislation requires. And I think you are doing the whole planning, the training on advocacy groups. So that's the kind of thing that we're talking here is legislative advocacy. And I have a flow chart that just sort of shows how the working groups work together to form the county task force. So before I close, I have a few minutes, and I do have a closing that I want to go through. But are there any questions about the things that I went over? It's a lot, but I wanted to let you know this is what we've been teaching people and how we're trying to fix Georgia and Arizona and Wisconsin, and North Carolina and Pennsylvania and Michigan and Nevada. So, yes, sir.
Have you guys taken in the recent O'Keefe videos into account where they're finding the senior citizens get donated for by strangers? Any way to continue that kind of door knocking in order to find more people and more corruption and donation side?
Yeah, I think that the first thing you have to do when you're looking at something like that is analysis of the donation data. We have not done that, but it seems like O'Keefe's new organization, OMG Media, I like saying that, I just think it's a funny name. O'Keefe Media Group is doing that kind of crunching of the data, and they have an opportunity, if you want to volunteer with them, to be able to go and do that. The one thing I would just be careful about when you're doing that, just make sure that you're asking questions that you're not accusing. Because when you slide from asking questions to accusing, you can get into libel or slander type issues. You don't want any of that, so just ask questions. And I have no doubt that O'Keefe's group would be training you adequately for that.
Anyone else?
How are you countering the Dominion voting machine?
Well,
Very carefully.
yeah. Very carefully, and as you know, Fox is paying almost $1 billion, so I don't have that kind of money. So I have to be careful when it comes to that. But I don't have to be careful because what I just went through with the things that happen in DeKalb County, Georgia. In Georgia, the whole system is Dominion. Every single county votes the exact same way, and everywhere, it's all Dominion, 100% for the ballots, marking your ballot and casting your ballot. I think we're in this situation, especially in Georgia, where those machines are not going away before 2024. And it's not like where you've got a county here in California that quit using it. In Georgia, there's no chance of that happening because it's all the same throughout the whole state. So what I say to that is you've got to be involved in the logic and accuracy testing. You have to have the poll watchers in place the whole entire time so that there is not the opportunity for people who you're watching to make changes. And then you've got to just watch what is happening with the numbers as they come in to make sure that the number of votes that were cast are actually the number of people who cast ballots. Those are the things that we can do as individual citizens. And showing up for the logic and accuracy testing is very important. I think a lot of what happened in Arizona, in hindsight, which is always perfect and always 2020, could be corrected in the future by making sure that the logic and accuracy testing is more robust. Right now, in Georgia, which is so important, in Arizona, given the new governor there. I think that the voting systems that are in place are probably going to be the same systems that are still in place in 2024. So I'm telling people, I don't like ballot harvesting. I think that's bad. But if we're going to change and not have ballot harvesting, we first have to win elections. So we have to win with what we've got, and we've got to secure the elections the best that we can as individual citizens, win, and then go back in 2025 and start making those changes that we want to see happen legislatively. And I'm not naive. I was targeted by the IRS. I am not naive. Every time I get up and give this speech, I think that I could wind up being subjected myself to a 4 a.m. visit by the Department of Justice, just for saying the things that I'm saying. So we know where we are in this country, and the chances of us being able to fix things, it's hard, it's scary. And you think about those systems and you feel helpless, and you probably don't like what I'm saying as the answer right now. But I also know that our country has faced hard times before. And I'm not going to give up on the country. So I'm going to work with the systems that we have in place and not give up, even though I know it's hard. And I'm not naive when I tell you these things.
Well, you know, things are so bad now in the country that 4 out of 5 computer servers now regret switching Trump votes to Biden.
That's good.
Richard.
Well, there's maybe a little bit of levity, but it's outside the box. Has anyone thought about constructing any Wi-Fi jammers to keep those machines from being rebooted?
I know that that's levity, so I'm just going to leave it as that was a joke. So don't think we're actually trying to interfere with the election interference. Any
I
other?
thought they assured us that the voting machines are not online.
No, they're not on at all.
If you want to ask a question, why don't you come around this way, and so I don't have to walk back and forth. While you're walking over here, Janice.
So my husband and I have done some election integrity work, and one of the polling places that we visited on election day, they had the booths where you're supposed to be able to vote secretly. It's a secret ballot, and there was lots of room to go vote. But there was 8-foot tables like this with people sitting next to each other voting. And so we said to the guy, you know, this is certainly against the rules. We have a secret ballot here. He goes, well, people can do what they want to do. And I said, so if I came in here and said, rah, rah, I love my candidate, you would not allow me to do that, right? He said, no, you would not be allowed. So you can't do just what you want. I said, meanwhile, there's a lot of people who might think their employer is trying to get them to vote the way they want, or a husband could be making a wife vote the way he wants. And he goes, and what is wrong with that?
So here's what I would recommend, based on what you've just said. You know that's happening here in the county. Okay, so you already know that that has happened because you've witnessed it. Find the section of the law in California that says you are entitled to a secret ballot. I don't know what it is, but get with an attorney like Greg or someone and get that law and print it out and make sure all of you are equipped with it, so that if you walk in and you see that happening as a voter, not as a poll watcher is different because you're not allowed to talk, but as a voter, then you say, wait a minute, right here, the law says I'm entitled to a secret ballot, and so is everyone else in here. Why are you violating the law? And we may need to refine the way to handle it, but I would pull up the law and I would show it to them, and I would say, not casting my ballot until you follow the law. And I might even call the police on them. I mean, that's how I would handle it. They're going to sit there and do that to you, then but you've got to be equipped by having the law. So that is one way that I would handle that problem in 2024. We had to do that. In Clayton County, Georgia, we have poll watchers. And they were not allowed, you're allowed as a poll watcher to go and get the count number off of the scanner throughout the day to know how many ballots have been cast. And you're allowed to walk around as long as you're not interfering with voters or looking at how they're voting. So you're allowed to do all of that. And some of the poll managers would not allow that to happen. And so they just pulled up the law and showed them the handbook that the Secretary of State's office did for the poll watchers and said, the Secretary of State, right here, it's his book, said this is what we're allowed to do. And if they wouldn't, go ahead and, here, why don't I leave this and you can take a look at it and I'll be right back. And they left it with them, and in some cases, the manager realized they were breaking the law and corrected it. And in others, they called the state hotline for voting problems. The state hotline got in touch with the Secretary of State's office, and they sent an investigator to investigate and to get it correct. So that's how we're getting it fixed when we run into similar problems in Georgia.
Next.
I just think you just answered the question is, what if you see violations? What happens with the data?
So, now here's the thing. You guys have a different situation working with your Republican Party than some places around the country. But I am a very strong advocate of a singular hotline for the state or for the county. You don't need to be handing out 14 different hotlines, because if there's a problem, people need to know where to go to call in the problem with the official people who are entitled by law to get in touch with the elections to get the problem corrected. And there's some mechanism for that. I don't know what it is here in California, but there will be a mechanism in place for that. So I would recommend calling the hotline, which might be set up by the party, it might be set up by a candidate, and making sure you report it to the hotline first, because they're the ones who have the legal team in place who can get in touch with the authorities and get it corrected. And that's the most important thing in real time. The second thing is keeping track of it and making sure your own task force knows what the problems were so that you can evaluate and go back and try to change it or adjust for it or adjust your training in the future. But what we want with all of these steps is to avoid getting to the point where there are problems and to make sure that if there are issues, as much as we can as individual citizens, that we are able to prevent those before voting ever even starts.
Would you like to discuss your plans, the other side of the topic tonight, winning in 2024?
Yeah. No, I wouldn't.
Next question.
No, I don't mind discussing it, but I'm going to be I don't have a lot to say at the moment publicly. All I can tell you is that we are working on refining and modernizing how we get out the vote. The left is doing it better than we are. And it does relate to harvesting ballots, but it isn't only about harvesting ballots. I've done a lot of research, I've seen what they're doing. Jeff, who is here with me, Jeff Davis, he's the director of operations for us, and we've done a lot of research on what's been going on the other side of the aisle since 2018. And we're trying to work and partner with a few other national groups to get our side modernized so that when you go to get out the vote, you're more efficient and more effective. And once we're able to do that, then we'll be able to come back and talk to you about it. Or if we can't come back, we'll make sure that we train Gregory and others and have videos so you can learn how to do it yourself.
Next.
I want to say thank you for your... Okay.
First rule of MC I learned many years ago. Never, ever let go of the microphone.
That's it. So thanks for your talk. It was spectacular and all your work that's been going into this. I've tried to get as involved as I can. I've been here about 5 years in California and did the election observation twice for the Election Integrity Project, and that was great. One time, the most recent time, stayed an hour after the polls closed just to keep an eye on what these clowns were up to, and you could see how nervous they got. They just kept looking at me, and they were going to try to kick me out and then call their supervisor, found that they couldn't, and then just let me sit there, and I did. And I was trying to do this, what you suggested, and actually getting involved, being in the trenches, and tried to sign up to work the polls. And so there's some stupid things you have to do to sign up. So I did, went to this course to be trained to do it. and then I guess made the mistake of answering a question. They kept saying, "Oh, we need your social security number to pay you." And I said, "I'd rather that be the number, and I'm not doing this for money, I'm doing it for my country," which I think was a red flag that
Yeah.
they're right. And so it was interesting. Right after that, so I did the course, and you sign your name. All of a sudden, I stopped getting emails about participating in being a poll worker, and it really pissed me off because I knew exactly what was going on. And I emailed the supervisor them a bunch of times, never heard back. And then I saw that there was a lawsuit, probably in Texas, where one of the polls kept people out of the poll. And I thought, it's probably a systemic issue. But as an individual, I didn't have the resources or the network to attack that. I was curious if you'd come across that, or if anyone's come across that, or would want to compare notes next time, and if they pull that crap, sue them. I mean, I'm sure that these guys are smart.
Right.
And you know they're keeping people like us out of election control. It's not an accident. So
Well, it probably very well is happening, and in certain parts of the country it happens more than others. One thing I will say is that when you're doing the poll working, now you know not to say that you don't want to be paid, but also because it is an employed position, it is a contract position probably for them. In our country, especially when you're doing work for the government, you're going to get paid, and you have to get paid so we don't run into any slavery accusations. So there is also that where they're going to make sure that if you're doing the work that they're supposed to be paying you for, they've got to pay you. Just legally they're going to have to, especially here in California.
You're correct. And I ultimately gave them the number because I thought, to me, it was more important to protect the country than to deal with the small risk of some idiot taking my social security number, and I have LifeLock, so I'm okay. So I succumbed to that. And interestingly, I got paid whatever it was, $12 an hour for the 3-hour orientation course, but I didn't participate in the election itself.
Right.
And that's what they blocked. And so
But then you have the jungle primary here, so it might, but you still register to vote for parties by party here, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean,
Or you can be a declined estate, but you can, in the first round, you can vote for anybody other than
Yes.
central committee members and president in the first round.
so it might be one of those situations where it's better to be declined estate, just so that if they go look at you on the voter file, they can't quite tell which party you affiliate with. But make sure that what I'm saying with that is legal, and I'm not telling you to violate the law. And do what the law is, not what I say. But I think that that is something you need to think about and strategize about. How can we get people to be the poll workers? What is our strategy going to be to have some people apply? How many should we have apply? And then track them throughout the process. So that's how I would handle the situation going forward, so that you're able to think about how you would react afterwards.
Mary.
Hi. Just wanted to make a little comment here because I've done both. In LA County, where I live, you can't go and work for the county like behind and take them when everybody comes in and you find them on books and all that kind of stuff. We can't do that if we're not vaccinated, or if we have to be vaccinated. If we're not, we can't. So I think that kind of took care of a lot of maybe honest people that would have been there. But on the other hand, one thing that I wanted to ask you was, I have learned a lot through all those experiences of going to the center, going to the voting area where they take the votes or the ballots and they put them through the machines and the whole bit, and I've done all that. There are a lot of laws here, a lot of things that you can or can't do. And with the first time I did it, we were allowed to talk to people at the polling places. Then the second time we did it, we were told we couldn't do it. Do not talk to anybody, just write everything down, everything you see, just write it down. Don't say anything to anybody. So it's a little different here, but my question to you is, do you like the books to read that give all of
The laws.
yeah, all the laws, and so that you, when you go in, because if you go in yourself without knowing that information, you could really do a lot of damage, like you are talking about saying the wrong thing to
Right.
the wrong person or whatever, you get yourself in a lot of hot water. So that would be my biggest concern with this, is to make sure that they actually know,
Okay.
you know.
So what we encourage people to do is first to read the election law, which is oftentimes long and boring, but it's important to read the law and be familiar with it. And then oftentimes what you may want to hone in on for the law is, if you're going to be a poll worker, honing in on the part of the law that it applies to poll workers. And then the same thing for poll watching or observers or whatever it may be called. So making sure that you understand what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do in those positions, and it will be outlined it should be in black and white in the law. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, there should be someone in the state, I don't know who, there should be someone in the southern part of the state and probably in the northern part and in the middle, because your state's so big. But a few people in the state who actually really know the election law very, very well. I don't know who they are for California, but then get those people to come in and to present with very specific training about California and about the counties where you would be working. And that's how we've handled it in Georgia, and Wisconsin, and Arizona, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Nevada. And I think I have time maybe for one more, right?
What other issues are
There's
back
someone-
here?
I have a question about your opinion on something you mentioned about the issue between Fox and Dominion. How do you think, if you have a big settlement, that's going to affect our cause? It seems like it would be detrimental.
To Fox?
To the fight against, for election integrity. That it might, we might lose credibility.
Well, the first thing that I think when you hear about it is that they have almost $1 billion more now. So that is a lot of money for that company to have. It is a lot of money. So that's one thing. Even if the lawyers get 25 or 30 or 50%, it's still a lot of money. So they could use that money for advertising, they could use that money to put out, who knows what they're going to use the money for, but they have a lot more flexibility going forward than they did before that. As far as making it seem like what is happening is real or isn't real, or diminishing what we're talking about, the things that I have talked about tonight, by and large, except for the issue with DeKalb County, which is documented, and every single thing, it is documented. You can find it in the newspaper. You can find information about it on the website from the DeKalb County government, DEKALB, DeKalb, even though in Chicago or Illinois it'd be DeKalb or something. I think it's very important when you're talking about the machines that you stick to provable facts that you can find from lawsuits or from government documents. So I talk about DeKalb County partly because it is a problem that happened. The count was wrong. The machine had a problem, and it's documented. But we also think that the problem with the machine is that someone who was supposed to remove the person who withdrew from the race didn't do that properly, or there was some sort of glitch with the software, whichever it may have been. I've been told it was a person outside of the software company. That it was a mistake with that process. It's my thinking when it comes to these computer systems, they're just too complicated. we voted in this country for 220 years without having these sophisticated computer systems. And the sophistication has created all sorts of complexity and added millions of dollars to the, maybe billions, I'm not sure, to the election administration process. And it has made the process, what it should have been doing is making it more transparent. It's made it less transparent. So when I try to talk about the problems with the machines, when I'm doing it, I talk about how I think they're too complex. I don't think that the testing is fully where it needs to be. And I think it's extremely important that the people who work for the government have the master password to be able to get into the software, and that the keys to the local kingdom aren't tied up with some third-party vendor somewhere who they have no control over. So I just sort of, that's where I stick to. Now, I don't spend 24 hours a day looking at all the problems with the computer system either. And there are some people who do, and they get a little bit deeper in it because they've done other research that I have not done. What I've tried to do is say, okay, the average supporter and activist in my group is not a computer programmer or an elected official. So what can I do to empower the average activist in my organization and around the country so that all that anger and worry and concern and frustration that we have for that country, all that passion that we have, we can turn it into action that is productive. Because if we just sit over, my thinking is this, I mean, my team hears this from me at least 3 times a week, passion to action, passion to action. But if we just sit here in all this anger and there's no outlet for it and nothing that can be done productively, I worry what happens to our country when that's going on. So I'm constantly looking for what can we do that where we can make a difference. It may not be perfect, but is it a way that we can make a difference? Okay, let me close out really, really quickly. So you can download the guide, but you're going to be able to take it with you by going to tpp.me/EIP-how-to-PDF. You might want to just take a picture of that so that you can get it later because it's complicated. Okay, oh, did you get it? Do you still? Where did it go? There we go. And I think we have it behind an email gate, so you'll have to enter your email, but then you can download the guide. And this is how you can get in touch with us about election integrity. And that email actually does go to my inbox, as well as like 5 other people on the team. electionintegrity@tpartypatriots.org, O-R-G, we are not .com, so O-R-G. And you can text the word integrity to the number 404-996-1717. Integrity to the phone number 404-996-1717. I think we've got a short code, but I don't know what it is and haven't updated the slide. Okay, now, the next steps would be to take the book, review it, figure out what you're doing in your county already with election integrity, and then figure out where you could fill in the gaps. Because I know people are already working on cleaning the voter rolls, and you've got people who are doing poll watching and poll observing, and I'm pretty sure you've got people looking at the computer system. So figure out what's going on and how you can supplement and enhance that. Okay, so let me just close out with this. Our American experiment in self-government is 246 years old. Through world wars, a civil war, through boom times and depressions, through a pandemic and terrible responses to viruses, America has continued to pass liberty from one generation to the next. Despite all of that, we've still found ways to pass it from one generation to the next. Our founders were brilliant and wise men. They bequeathed to us a republic and the tools to keep it if we had the courage and integrity to do the hard work to keep it. They recognized that our rights flowed from our Creator to us, and our government was nothing more than a man-made construct to secure those rights. Belief in our Creator was fundamental to the Founding Fathers' concept of self-government. And it did not end with them, as we saw tonight when we prayed tonight. And Ronald Reagan understood our Creator's relevance in more modern terms. During the course of his 1980 campaign for president, in his one debate with Jimmy Carter, Reagan said, "The American dream is not that every man must be level with every other man. The American dream is that every man should be free to become whoever God intends he become." We are here today because we want to make a difference with the same courage and conviction our founding fathers possessed as they took on the greatest empire in the world and won. In the same spirit, Ronald Reagan taught us, grateful that we still live in an America where we are free to become whatever God intends we should become. Take note, all of you who are distressed and concerned that this country that we love and cherish is on the wrong track. You are not alone, and liberty will not die on our watch. We will never give in. We will never give up. We will never stop fighting. Our children and our grandchildren are depending on us to dig deep, to be brave, and to trust in God, to protect them from those who seek to corrupt their hearts and their minds, to secure elections so they still matter, to secure the blessings of liberty for their generation. We will succeed, and we will win, and we will keep our republic.
Amen.
Thank you. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.